Welcome to Second Saturday Conversation, where we explore Christianity in and for the 21st century. Christianity today is in the midst of a whirlwind of rapid change. The world is so different than it was 100 years ago, or 50 years ago, or 20 years ago, or 5 years ago. Science and technology and our environment is impacting us socially and politically and existentially, and Christianity is in the midst of all of that. And I would say that Christianity is kind of twisting in the winds of change uncomfortably. But I suggest that this is also an opportune time for Christianity to see itself again, to self-examine, to self-critique, to reimagine and transform itself, to renew itself. Some might think that Christianity is already too wrecked. Well, I've not given up on it yet. Sort of illustrative of this sort of unsettling acceleration and complexity and change that we're in is the music that immediately precedes our beginning session. It's from the movie Oppenheimer. It's less than 2 minutes, but it has 21 tempo changes.
How do I get in here?
Oops. And we can, I think in listening to that music, we can feel the instability and even the dis-ease in its ascending and descending agility. And perhaps that instability is what we feel in our own rapid tempo changes. And the piece in many ways, I think, is rather disquieting. So what also strikes me about that piece of music, though, is the title of that piece. It's the title is "Can You Hear the Music?" And that's a line from a conversation between Niels Bohr, a physicist, and Robert Oppenheimer. Niels Bohr says, the important thing isn't can you read the music, it's can you hear it. Can you hear the music, Robert? Can you hear the music? In other words, it might be, do you have a deep intuitive understanding of the mathematics that's used in physics, or just the ability to perform calculations and solve equations? Well, I think that that is a question that Christianity needs to ask of itself. Can you hear the music in this time of change and disorder? Or are we only interested in propositions and solving problems and answering questions? Can you hear the music? The overall theme for this program year is Skylight and Seasoned Tongue and Groove. And that's an image from a poem by Seamus Heaney. And we will post that poem as part of our closing slides. And in light of how I'm introducing today, seasoned tongue and groove might be akin to the mechanics of calculation and equation, to reading the music. And there's a place for that. And Skylight might be more akin to hearing the music and affirming a deep intuition or sense of the musicality of life that opens up our senses to a generosity of spirit. So as we shelter under our seasoned tongue and groove, can we hear the music? As I said, that I think is the question for Christianity today, and even more importantly, for ourselves. Can we hear the music? Jeff, would you orient us a bit to the upcoming plenary time and how to use the raising of the hands and all of that?
Sure. Good morning, Marianne. How are you?
Jeff, I'm pretty good. How about you?
Good. Good. Glad to be here with you
Yeah.
and everybody else.
You too.
So when Marianne is finished with her reflections, there'll be a plenary time, which is a time for you to ask questions, share insights or wonderings. And the way we've been adapting the way that we do that over the times that we've been together. And now what we've found that works the best is that if you would like to make a comment, ask a question, share a reflection, if you go down to the bottom menu bar in Zoom, you'll see a little button that says reactions. And if you click on that, there's an opportunity, it says raise hand. And you just click on that and your little video will show up in a queue at the top of the screen. And I will call on people who have their hands raised and ask you to unmute yourself, and then you can share. I would just also like to encourage you to consider what it is you want to say before you raise your hand, so that when you get called on, you can keep your comments to a good 2 minutes. That helps us to be succinct and direct so that we can give more people an opportunity to interact with Marianne. So.
Great. Thank you, Jeff, so much. Thank you.
Oh.
Before I get underway today, I'm going to take a moment of personal privilege. I don't actually see all of the participants, so I don't have the Hollywood Squares part of this showing. But as we were starting today, I did notice a couple of people who had tuned in for today. And one that I saw is Sylvia Crowder. She's from Du Bois, Wyoming. And so Sylvia, I want to acknowledge that I saw you, I see you. I'm delighted to have you here with us today. I look forward to being in touch. Sylvia and I have recently been in touch. I go to Du Bois, Wyoming to Ring Lake Ranch, and I always want to spend time with Sylvia when I'm there. So anyway, Sylvia, delighted to have you here this morning. Made my heart glad to see you. Okay, so moving right along. Can you hear the music? My invitation for today is to wonder, do we need more poetics, which is actually a kind of narrative style, or do we need more dogmatics? I suggest that poetics is actually the real language of our faith, not propositions. So I want to begin by reading a quote that we posted in the beginning of our, from 9:15 to 9:30, we show slides with various quotes. There was a lot of reading to do today. We will send out all those quotes to you in another week or two, so you'll have a chance to look at them if you haven't had a chance to do that today. But I want to quote from Mark Oakley, who is a priest. He's the chancellor of St. Paul's Cathedral in London. He's written a wonderful book called The Splash of Words. And I want to quote directly from him. Faith, he writes, is a love of the hidden, a pursuit in relationship, a search for the visibility of the invisible. Then quoting D.H. Lawrence, he writes, we want God's voice to be clear, but it is not. It is as deep as night with a dark clarity, like an X-ray. It reaches our bones. He goes on to say, we worship a God who does not reveal propositionally, but in collage. And collage, as you know, is a piece of art made up of sticking various materials and things together, okay? God does not reveal propositionally, but in collage. We are called to reflect this God by resisting closure, raising expectations, opening up a generosity of spirit, not a meanness of pious restriction. Okay, I'm going to read this again. Mark Oakley writes, faith is a love of the hidden, a pursuit in relationship, a search for the visible, for the visibility of the invisible. We want God's voice to be clear, but it is not. It is as deep as night with a dark clarity. Like an X-ray, it reaches our bones. We worship a God who does not reveal propositionally, but in collage. And we are called to reflect this God by resisting closure, raising expectations, opening up a generosity of spirit, not a meanness of pious restriction. Well, actually, we should just go right into plenary. But let me go on and a bit more. Poetics and dogmatics. I want to contrast those two by talking a little bit about theology and theopoetics. Classical theology, okay, which is where we get most of our belief systems, constructs language for Christianity in propositional terms, in terms that assert a judgment or an opinion or a premise. And ology, O-L-O-G-Y, I kind of looked this up. Interestingly enough, okay, theology, is O-L-O-G-Y, ology, is a branch of study of something graspable, containable, capturable. And reason is its preferred and most valued method, okay? So theology seeks to name and explain and even construct a congruent, systematic narrative. And the architecture, the thought architecture of theology has tended to be classically fixed and hierarchical. It tends to tell us what to believe and why in the name of truth and logic, okay? Now, one thing that's sort of unfortunate about that methodology is that Christianity is often presented as monolithic, as if Christianity is the one immovable belief system, uniform, invulnerable, homogeneous. Well, Christianity has never been that. So in contrast to theology, theopoetics, which comes from the Greek, poiesis, which means to make or create something that wasn't there before, okay? So theopoetics resists propositions. In fact, it actually breaks away from them. Theopoetics uses language more metaphorically and imaginatively, uses language as analogy or analog, and knows that language has an ability to generate its own experience, okay? That language can create its own sort of event of meaning. Now, I know, though that sounds pretty abstract, but I'm going to continue sort of abstractly to contrast the two. But let me say this, that both theopoetics and theology, they are both responses to the mystery of life, to the mystery that we're here at all, to the mystery of that in which we live and move and have our being, okay? They are both responses to mystery. to the mystery of life. And theology tends to want to capture the mystery or even safeguard it. Theopoetics says we cannot grasp it. We can't fully comprehend it. So whatever language we use has to be provisional. Okay? So let me do some sort of brief contrasts. Again, this is to sort of give you a feel for theology versus theopoetics, for poetics versus doctrine. Okay, theology will give primacy to thought, and that's these are both. I'm not saying one is good and one is bad, but these are contrasts. Okay, theology will give primacy to thought, and theopoetics tends to give primacy to experience. Theology has a way of declaring, okay, declaring what is. Theopoetics imagines what is. Theology kind of makes demands. Okay, it makes a statement and makes a demand. But theopoetics evokes something in us more than declares what we ought to think. Theology prescribes, and again, theopoetics is more like inviting out your thoughts, imaginings, wonderment. Theology tends to argue. Theology will make its case. Theopoetics tends to keep things open. Theology sort of establishes, this is it, this is what we've come to. Theopoetics, as I said a minute ago, the language of theopoetics, whatever it asserts, is provisional. Theology will tend to want to look for and see the universals, and as part of a grand narrative that's even congruent, that explains the mystery of it all. And theopoetics values more the subjective, is more interested in the particular, is more interested in the particular story, not a grand narrative. So theology's work is to try to provide a conclusion. And theopoetics, I would say, rather dances with possibilities, even impossibilities. So theology is driven by logos and reason and thesology, that to try to grasp what the mystery is, to capture the ineffable. Okay? But theopoetics is more driven by this notion of poiesis, which is a making beyond itself. I mean, it knows that it can never capture the ineffable. So theopoetics, though, does risk saying what it also knows is unsayable. So theopoetics risks putting words to our experiences, putting words to our hints and guesses, as T.S. Eliot might say, putting words to our experience of the rush of life. And I would say we can't help that as human beings. I mean, it's a very human thing to do. We can't help but try to narrate or story our experiences. It's in our DNA. But I would say that theology is more tempted to make a firm, fixed statement. Theopoetics, to borrow from Blake, kisses the joy as it flies. Okay. So the other thing about theopoetics is that it keeps a space open for what we don't see, for what we can't yet imagine, for what is yet to come. It keeps space open for something beyond itself. Okay. So I'm going to illustrate or try to illustrate a little bit about theopoetic take on some gospel stories rather than a more propositional take on gospel stories. But before I do that, I want to say that I think that all of us here on Second Saturday have a deep intuition that amidst life's hurdy-gurdy and all of its atrocities and dangers and uncertainties, that yet we say, how filled with awe is this place. I think that, good morning, Theo. Yeah, good boy. I think that to return to how I began this session, I think that we, amidst all of the confusions, that we hear the music. And I don't think that we're impatient to settle the issue, okay? I think that we gather here on Second Saturday and come together because, in a sense, we all ask the question, do you hear what I hear? Or what is it that you hear? Do you hear the music? I think all of us on Second Saturday are more drawn to hearing the music. And I think that we recognize that in one another. So, by the way, this is the ultimate ball. Here you go, Theo. Okay. We may say it float behind me again sometime this morning, but so be it. Okay. I want to take the liberty now of, I'm going to pick 3 gospel stories, and I'm going to play with them a little bit and give my shot at talking about what it might mean to think about these stories more theopoetically than propositionally. And the first would be, a story that, we've all heard, that Jesus can walk on water, okay? So Jesus walking on water. And that when we hear that story in church, or when we talk about that story, it's almost used as though this is evidence of Jesus' divinity. This story is a kind of proof text in a way for that Jesus could do the extraordinary. He could do the supernatural. Jesus can walk on water. And that's part of what tells us that he's important, exceptional, completely unique, and why we should call him Lord. Okay. Well, I don't think that was the intent of the storyteller to begin with. Okay. It's almost like the tradition reads this backwards and sees this story about Jesus walking on water and uses that as a way to say, this illustrates his divinity, his exceptionalness, the fact that he can walk on water. And I would say that people in the 21st century, a lot of us, you know what, we just can't believe that, not only about Jesus, but about anybody. I don't think Jesus walked on water. So if that's not what the story is about, what is it about? And I suggest that even the early writers, they were not writing this propositionally, that there was something about Jesus, something about their experience of Jesus that gave rise to this story. And that they came up with a story because they didn't know how else, a better way to try to talk about what they were trying to get at, okay? And that the images in this story are incredibly memorable and is something you can return to and think about more and more than if you got an explanation, okay? Now, I want to identify a schema of Ricoeur that says that experience gives rise to symbol gives rise to thought, okay? So my premise here is, and for all the gospel stories, is that there was some experience that people had that gave rise to the story, that gave rise to the symbols in the story, like walking on water. That's more of a symbolic, metaphorical image than it is a description of something that happened at a particular time and place and space. And then how we reflect about it can be myriad, right? But the tradition has tended, and in modernity has tended to take a story like that and try to make it into a proposition. And I think that that's part of what is really losing cachet for Christianity in the 21st century. In fact, even naysayers of, hi, sweetie, naysayers of, Jesus didn't walk on water will try to explain that incident by saying things like, well, there were probably these big rocks right under the surface of the water, and so he was really walking on stones. Well, I don't think that's an argument for anything. That's assuming that that still takes it at the level of, did this happen or not? Well, the only way it could have happened is if there were rocks. Did it happen or not? As Marcus says in one of the quotes that we had this morning was, so often we spend time saying, well, did it really happen or not? Did it happen or not? And we can argue that back and forth and try to make an argument back and forth. But in doing so, we may miss the meaning. I mean, there may be a meaning in this that can be evoked, we can be curious about, that is not answered by the question, did this really happen? As Marcus would say, what these images will suggest to us is, what might this mean? Or as Marcus would say, why was the story told this way? And I would say that the reason that the story of Jesus walking on water was told that way is that there was something about Jesus that then is imaged in this picture of him walking on water. So let's then just play with this. So what might walking on water suggest? That the changes and chances and tides and ebb tides of life didn't take him under. That he was not completely overwhelmed by the waves of life. That he was able to keep a buoyancy about him, even in the midst of the changes and chances of life. That instead of being overwhelmed and being pulled down into the abyss, he was able to keep his equanimity about him. So what was it about Jesus that gave these early followers of Jesus this image that it's like he can walk on water? It's like he can stay above all of this, okay? Now, I'm just throwing that out as a possible interpretation of what the image of walking on water might suggest. You will come up with others. And then, my thought about this is that if we look at these stories in that way and talk about them more in that way, not propositionally, like, well, you should believe that Jesus walked on water because that is all evidence that he was the Son of God and could do the supernatural. And that really happened in Galilee 2,000 years ago. And we need to believe it because there it is in the Bible, it says it. I think that's a flattening of the understanding of story. I think it's a flattening of the power of language. And I think that is one reason why people in the 21st century are saying, as I look at Christianity, I just don't get it. Okay. So what I'm playing with here in terms of how to play with the images and the language of the story that creates its own experience, that's theopoetic, okay? If we try to over-theologize that language to try to explain it propositionally, I think that we miss the power of the story and the power of the experience that gave rise to the story. As Oakley says, God doesn't reveal in propositions. God reveals more in collage, in a mixture of a number of things. And in this case, the author of this story came up with the image of Jesus can walk on water. Okay, so you get what I'm playing with here. Okay, and this is not original, as you know. I mean, this approach has been also used throughout the tradition, but we tend to literalize, and I think that that's a mistake. So let's take another story. Lazarus, the raising of Lazarus. You might remember that Lazarus was ill, and his sister said, oh, Jesus, come. I know that if you came, that he would be all right. And Jesus doesn't get there in time, and Lazarus dies, and he is put in a tomb. And Jesus finally gets there and goes to the tomb and says, Lazarus, come out. And he does. Okay. So this story on a surface level is also tends to be thought of in terms of, well, Jesus can raise people from the dead. Again, he's extraordinary. This is unique. He has a supernatural power like God. He can raise people from the dead. And Lazarus was dead, but he called him out of the tomb, and Lazarus was still alive. Okay. If we use that kind of story as but another illustration of his exceptional superpowers, all right, but I don't think that that was the intent of the story at all. And by the way, some people will say, well, gosh, that it's kind of an awful story that maybe Jesus delayed his arrival so that he could show off that even after Lazarus was dead, that he could be raised from the dead. Well, that's a take. But again, I don't think that that's what was intended with this story, and it's certainly not what I get out of it. And let me tell you how I have played with this story. And again, this is not definitive. I'm not the ultimate exegete, but this is what this story has stirred in me. A little bit of Bible study helps. I happen to know that the word Lazarus means God is my help, or God helps. Okay, so I know that. I did, you did a little what does Lazarus mean in a first century? What is the etymology of that name? So Lazarus means God is my help, or God is help. So this is kind of how, knowing that, this is how I played with the story. Okay, Lazarus, God is my help, has apparently died. God is my help is dead. And by the way, as a sidebar, in April of 1966, Time magazine said so. And so Lazarus is bound in burial cloths. Okay, that's what you do, put in the tomb. So when Jesus calls Lazarus out of the tomb, where I went with, because I think of this story in terms of image, not in terms of proposition. When I think of the image of this story, I think about what are the burial cloths that have wrapped around God is my help, or God helps. What is it that has so bound God in that way that it might as well be burial cloths? What has bound God is my help so much that it treats God as though God were dead? And my take recently on that image is, what has bound and strangulated God is my help? Maybe doctrine and dogma and creeds and a kind of tight belief system that has actually taken all of the breath away from, all of the pneuma away from our understanding of what is God. That God is not creeds and doctrines and dogmas, that is, I mean, there's a place for that, okay? But that maybe those are the burial cloths of God is my help that has made God is my help, Lazarus, seem dead and entombed. That's a more theopoetic way of playing with the story. Okay. And what I love also about this story is that Jesus says to the community that's gathered, because there are people gathered around to see this event, Jesus says to the community, unbind him. And I loved that. It's like, so here we are as a community, even here on Second Saturday, and maybe part of our task is to unbind Lazarus, to move away, remove those burial cloths that is making us think that, quote unquote, God is dead. And of course, all of that requires more conversation, but what do we mean by God, and so forth and so on. But that I also think is the power of theopoetics, is that it invites more conversation. It invites more reflection on images. Maybe it'll even invite more images. So there's something sort of unfolding and invitational and opening about a theopoetic way of seeing things. And that rather than thinking that there's one rote meaning of this, that it exposes this multivalent depth of our inquiry about the nature and character of God and mystery in life. That there's not just one tight, correct answer or response, that there's an abundance of response, that it's, in a sense, it's inexhaustible. Okay. I think that that's the theopoetic generosity. And I think that it encourages our imaginative response, our wonderment, and our asking, how does this story speak to me, this 2,000-year-old story, or maybe it's older than that, how does it speak to me? And I think that's legitimate, because if some reasons that, we have, some stories are called classics in that we feel that they continue to speak generation after generation. I think there are some stories that touch on deep themes of life, of mystery around life and death and possibility and limit. And we struggle with that all the time. That's the nature of being human. Okay. So that's sort of how I play with the Lazarus story. So let me pull out one more story. Since this is Eastertide, let me play a little bit with the notion of the empty tomb. The tomb was empty. Now, I think that propositionally, we tend to see that story in Scripture, and then we'll say, he is risen. What that story is saying is, Jesus isn't in the tomb. Jesus is risen. Therefore, Jesus somehow lives. And then we, I think, make the mistake of thinking that that image in the story has something to do with a corpse or with the resuscitation of a corpse. I don't think that story has anything to do with a corpse. But our tradition and our efforts to try to make meaning of an empty tomb has led us to talk about, well, then that means Jesus is risen, Jesus still lives. And the empty tomb becomes a symbol of our belief in that Jesus is everlasting, because the tomb was empty. In fact, there's a very well-known New Testament scholar, deeply regarded, deeply beloved by many, who at one point, I don't know if you'd still say this, but at one point said that if bones of Jesus were found in the tomb, Christianity would completely collapse and fall apart. All due respect to this person, I think that's ridiculous. Okay. I don't think that the tomb is empty has anything to do with a corpse or with a possible resuscitation of a corpse. I don't think that's the message. But what might be suggested by this image of the tomb is empty. Well, I haven't done a lot with this, but let me tell you what has come up for me in my thinking about doing this today. I happen to know, and this is where some scholarship or a little bit of background can help, okay? That Plato came up with this term called chora, K-H-O-R-A. Sometimes it's spelled C-H-O-R-A, but chora, K-H-O-R-A. And philosophers will tell me that I'm not accurate about this, but this will give you a gist, okay? Chora means space. But chora is a space where something unthinkable can happen. Chora is a space, not just empty space. I mean, yes, it's empty space, but it's a kind of space where something else can take place, something yet known, something beyond what we can imagine. So it's akin to a womb. Chora is kind of like a womb, that something can become life in this space. and we don't know what it's going to be. Okay. So it has analogies to womb or even a matrix. So Cora is an empty space, but the space of unthought of possibility, and maybe in that regard, impossibility. We don't even know yet, but something might emerge from this space that will change. I'll say, and for this story, will change the world. So I suggest, but this is playing, okay, this is not a fixed, tight interpretation, but this is, I think, the theopoetic invitation, is that I would then suggest that the storytellers, after Jesus was executed and Jesus was killed, and Jesus is not here anymore, Jesus is dead, but they had an experience that even though Jesus, that the tomb, the place put a dead person, that even though Jesus is dead, and by the way, Jesus might have ended up in a common pauper's grave, and there's lots of speculation about all of that. But that aside, again, the story, what kind of experience was stirring in the early Christian communities or in the early communities that followed Jesus that would give rise to a story that would say the tomb is empty. It's like Jesus is dead, but even though he's not here, there is yet a space. There is yet possibility that more can come, more life can come from what Jesus was about. To borrow this phrase, it's like they could kill the poet, but not the poem. Or to use this phrase, they could kill the dreamer, but not the dream. So to have this amazing image of a tomb, which represents death, is like, no, but they could kill the poet, but not the poem. They could kill the dreamer, but not the dream. The poet, the poem, the dream is the Cora. There's something more to come. And indeed, that more, that sense of possibility for we can still make possible the kingdom of God, that things can be done differently. We can still live for justice and compassion. We can still live for the value of every human being. We can still rise up against violence in a nonviolent way. Jesus' community was nonviolent. Jesus was nonviolent. That's pretty clear. We can still live into possibility even after Jesus' execution. Okay. And indeed, that's what happened. I mean, here we are 2,000 years later, we're still talking about Christianity, but why? Is it because Jesus was raised from the dead? You know, I don't, or is it because there's something that lives that's so important, that gives us life? And he knew about that. He lived and in a sense died knowing that his poem was more important, that it had more life in it than his own. Okay. So I suggest that that's a theopoetic way of thinking about, for instance, the empty tomb story. And that sense that there can be more, that there is possibility, even in facing the reality of death and limit. I think that's resurrection. And we see it and experience it again and again. And we experience it in such ways that, and we live it out as Christians, and other people do too, that's worthy of the name of Jesus and all that he meant and lived and embodied and represented. Okay. But that's very different than suggesting that the story about the empty tomb is that hidden in that story is a proposition. Okay. So you kind of, you get my drift. And what I'm saying is that theopoetics invites us to this kind of engagement with story and even with the tradition. So Theology, I think, will tend to want to bring closure. It tends to be dogmatic. As I said earlier, it tends to declare. Theopoetics tends to invite. It asks us to imagine. It asks us to wonder. It keeps things open. Now, each may needeth each, okay? So I'm not saying out with theology and with theopoiesis or theopoetics. It's like each needeth each. There's a place for each. But I suggest that in the 21st century, that Christianity needs a good dose of theopoetics. That theopoetics can, if you will, help us to hear the music again. That it might help Christianity to hear its own music and to realize the musicality that is in religious traditions. So to call back Oakley, theopoetics is a language that resists closure, raises expectations, opens up generosity, loves what is hidden, pursues in relationship, and searches for the visibility of the invisible, and keeps space open for an event, a meaning event that welcomes the possible and even the impossible, which I think is very different than the unbelievable. And as I said, I think this is resurrection. So, what do you think? I'm really curious to know how you respond to my suggestions about theology and theopoetics. As you can tell, I'm kind of leaning towards theopoetics today. And I'd love to know what you make of my suggestion that maybe theopoetics can be a balm, B-A-L-M, for Christianity today. I'm curious to know what's stirring in you and what your thoughts are. So we've got a good time for conversation. I see that there are already a number of hands up. So rather than reviewing the guidelines, which we use every time we gather the guidelines for listening, which is all, there are also guidelines for speaking. I won't actually, Jake, maybe you can post them, but instead of reading them, I'm just going to give us a minute to continue to collect our thoughts. You can see the guidelines, and then in about 30 seconds, I'll give us 30 seconds of quiet. Then we'll move into conversation. Okay. Jeff, do you want to help us move along?
Sure, Marianne. Lots of hands are going up, so I think you have stirred the pot in a positive way.
Well,
So-
I in whatever way, I'm interested in stirring the pot. And so if this sort of stirs some thoughts or some wonderment or whatever, that's part of my hope for Second Saturday. This is a place we can come and explore and wonder and agree, disagree. But yes, I'd love to stir the pot and stir our thoughts a little bit. So I hope that's the case.
So I'll just a quick reminder, you'll have 2 minutes to share your reflection or ask your question. If you go over that 2 minutes, I'll just put up a little finger like that as a way of gently reminding you that it's time to wrap up so that we can hear a response and give as many people a chance to interact with Marianne as possible. And so it's helpful from your end if you compose what it is you want to say before you raise your hand, so that you can keep it succinct and to that 2-minute limit. So let's
Yeah,
begin.
good luck. Some of us think out loud.
Yeah, exactly.
But
Let's,
anyway,
let's begin with Edward Boy. Edward, do you want to unmute yourself?
not yet.
There, I think we have you.
Hear me?
Yep.
Yes, indeed. Perfect.
Okay. Okay. As a clinical pastoral therapist, I find people who are insecure and need something solid, consistent, boundaries in order to feel safe and secure. They need a father who can do no wrong and who will protect them so that they feel safe and will give them strength through hard times, like somebody's got their back. Theopoetics seems based on trust and faith in the moment and is open-ended. It seems to be a narrative for those of us who are drawn to adventure, new experiences, exploring, risk-taking, and breaking the rules. And I look at it in light of James Fowler's stages, that those who are needing more structure are probably in the first 3 stages, and those of us who are open and exploring are somewhere in the probably 4th and 5th stages, hopefully sometime reach the 6th stage.
Yes, I think your summary and contrast is really correct. And you being a clinical pastoral therapist are aware that people who are in, let's say, a different stage, and by the way, stage stuff kind of freaks me out a little bit, because those of us in the 6th stage, it might sound patronizing, right? And it's amazing how many people I know are in the 5th and 6th stage. Lucky me, right? So I think that we have to be a little careful about that. But as a therapist, as a counselor, as somebody who, as a carer of souls, that if somebody is in a particular place where they need stability in a father figure, or they need to reinterpret that in a way that they finally feel that they have a safe attachment figure, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I want to be sort of understanding and tender about that, and accept that without being overly judgmental about where they might be in terms of consciousness or spirituality. Is that
Absolutely.
fair? Is
Yeah.
that, and I'm not suggesting that you are saying that, but I think the contrast that you articulated is really clear and helpful. And it might help us to appreciate where other people are, to realize that no, they have different needs than we do spiritually at this point. And so to just treat that with care.
Yeah, absolutely. The tendency sometimes to want to teach someone to give them a better view of things.
Right. Absolutely.
That's wasted effort. You just really have to accept where they are, because that's what they need at that particular time.
That's exactly right. And that, but I love your contrast between trust and fear in a way. And I think that the theopoetic invitation is one to say, don't be afraid. Come on, it's all right.
Yeah.
Don't. Okay. And our closing song today is going to address that a little bit. But anyway, Edward, thank you. Thank you for.
You're welcome.
Thank you very, very much.
Thanks. Kate Gibbs. Kate, can you unmute?
Hello, Marianne.
Hello, Kate. Nice to see you today.
It's good to see you. I was thinking after last week, or not last week, last month, I was so, when we ended, I was a little sad to go because I enjoyed it so much.
Sweet
I-
thing. Yeah,
I was,
yeah, I miss these folks too.
I was thinking, if I met Marianne in person, I think I'd give her a hug.
Oh, that would be great, Katie. I wish you could. I wish
But
you could. I
anyway,
need it. I need it. And I need it this week. And not because of this session, but other things that have happened this week. I could have used that this week, just so you know.
um,
Thank you.
well, any, anyway, back to the point of what you were talking about. Um, in my church that I started going to, and I haven't been to church all, my whole life, but the minister talks about it in a very metaphorical way. So
Right.
that helps me a lot. He talked a lot of like you do. I liked when you were talking about the metaphor of Jesus walking on the water on water because so I have cerebral palsy and so it's a little hard. I walk but I need to continually work on it and I go to a walking therapist and a while ago she made me walk on a, a box, the top of a box around the edges to balance and I remember thinking for inspiration if Jesus could walk on water, I can walk on this box, but that's taking it a little literally. But that's what I thought. And the
What I
raising
love about that though, Katie, is that yes, maybe you took that literally, but the way you took it was into your own life. It's like, well, if Jesus can walk on water, maybe I can walk on these books, right? So, and so in a sense, you could do what he did by just,
sort of, yeah,
yeah, I love
it
it.
wasn't books. It was one box, so
Box,
it was,
okay.
books
Box.
would have been harder. But the other thing was I like also your telling of the Lazarus story. Um, but the way my minister described it was more of a mental health thing. Like when you're struggling with anxiety, like I do, sometimes you get thoughts in your head, and what I do is I physically rock back and forth. It's not very comfortable, but it's like Jesus was saying to stop almost,
Yeah.
and unraveling the bandages or unraveling the chains, the chains that you're in with this mental health problem. So we was almost talking about mental health like 1,000 years ago.
Right. Katie, I love that because I think what you then did with that story, or and what your pastor did, is that see how that Lazarus story applies on many, many levels. So it can apply to us maybe on mental health levels. Like, what are some things that just wrap us up and get us all tangled up in ourselves, you know? And so I think I think that's the power of these stories, is how they can speak to us so particularly, you know?
Yeah,
Those are two stories that you experienced. So for you, these stories became an event
yeah,
in your own life. And that
especially for
is what these stories are about.
yeah.
You've illustrated that really, really beautifully.
Brent, our pastor, reads a lot of Eckhart Tolle, and so he's very much into being present and in the moment. So he brings that into a lot of his sermons too, and that's
Yeah,
also how Jesus might have thought.
right. Yeah, I love that. And being in the moment. And I actually, for, all of my ways of talking about this and that, I actually think Jesus was a healer. And I'll say to you, Kate, that I think Jesus is still a healer. I myself call upon Jesus for healing. So there's something here. There's something working in the depths. So
Yeah, because he
Thank
brings you in to the moment,
yes,
and maybe that's how he heals.
uh, beautifully put, and so truly put. He brings us into the moment, and that's where we're healed. Kate, thank you so much. Kate, you should be sitting in this chair.
No, I try not to talk so much. I'm watching chips.
No,
Yeah.
this is, what you've shared this morning is really important for all of us. So thank you for doing it.
Thank you.
Good to
Thank
see
you,
you.
Kate. Lovely. How about Richard Mallory? Richard, can you unmute?
Good morning. This is wonderful. And just based on what was just said, I'm thinking about a lot of the gospel text here in the season. And the statement in tomorrow's gospel from Luke, there's this repeat, the Messiah must suffer.
Mm.
And the whole mystery of suffering. And as a good socialized American, this is that part of me now speaking. I object.
Mm.
I object. There must not be suffering in life. No, it must not be. It should all be upbeat. So I'm aware of that part of me.
Mm.
And I know better because I've been through the loss of a spouse and a few other things that involve suffering.
Suffering too. Mhm.
Yeah, I know, Marianne. I'm sorry for your loss.
Mm.
I'm sorry for all of our loss of Marcus. He died much too young.
Great.
Yeah. I was thinking about, along with the contrasting of theology with poetics, and a little background. When I was in seminary in the 60s, everything seemed so competitive about getting to the right answer. So somehow there's something about in theology, there's a quest for the right answer, being right, being competitive, rather than in theopoetics, the emphasis is on gathering, is on community, on supporting of everyone.
Yes.
And I love the principle on one particular Bible study. During this Bible study, you have the right to change your mind 6 times. And even that proposition is a metaphor.
Right. 6 or 60.
Yeah, yes. Imagine that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's underneath that is that there is more, to use a sort of a Bible word, there's more abundance.
Mhm.
There's abundance that maybe we miss out on it when we are too quick to close the case.
Yeah. And things stay too tight.
Yeah.
And one must be checking one's ideas and not dare say something that could be criticized
Yeah.
and lead to not belonging.
Oh, well said. I think that's a big concern.
Yeah.
The lead to not belonging. I
Yeah.
mean, what Ed was saying about adventure, risk.
Yes.
A lot of us are risk averse, and we want to belong more than not. So
Yeah.
yes, that's so. So again, as Marcus would say, if we quibble about did it happen or not happen, if we sort of get in this binary, did it or not, or either or, we miss out on a lot
Yeah.
of exploration and conversation.
Yeah. Miss out on getting the nurture
Yeah.
that the story offers. One more thing.
That we have to offer one another.
I'm thinking of approaching the Nicene Creed theopoetically. And I sense, even in the English translation from the Greek, they couldn't hide the poetry, even though they're trying to get at all the right propositions to please the emperor and, get into good Roman order.
Yeah.
But there's something about the movement of the words that seem to be congruent with evolution, the expanding universe. So
Yeah, nice. So in a sense, you hear the music in the Nicene Creed.
yes.
Sure.
One thing that helped me a lot with the Nicene Creed some years ago, there was an Episcopal church in Manhattan where people, musicians, they put the Nicene Creed into a jazz
Perfect,
with words.
perfect.
And there was then a whole new level of meaning came through.
I think that's a great idea. I love that. That's right. Don't read it like it's a discourse. Read
Yeah,
it like maybe lyrics to a song or something.
yeah. And
Yeah.
then that lends itself to dance.
I love it.
Yeah.
Right. As a friend of mine and I often say, if you can't dance to it,
Forget it.
forget it. And I would say that about theology. If you can't dance to it. Anyway, Richard, thank you.
Thank you. Lynn Tolk. Unmute.
Okay, yes. Okay, I'll try to be real quick. I first of all want to say thank you again. Did that work?
Yes, you're on. You're good.
Okay. That every time periodically I get really fed up with Christianity, and you always bring hope back to me. So I thank you for that.
I hope
When
I'm
you-
not misleading you.
No. I got my own path, and it goes where it goes, like the Spirit.
Right.
When you talked about listening to the music, it brought back a memory of something I read years ago about a dancer who went deaf, and she could no longer hear the music. She learned how to dance by sensing the beat and the rhythm through her feet in the floorboards. And so, it's not limited to any particular organ. It's just being open. So I like that little metaphor too.
I like that very much.
Yeah. And I recently, actually, I think it was yesterday, I was listening to Thomas Hubel. I've been studying with him on matters of healing with trauma. And he said that the cure for mistrust is not more trust. It is listening to the mistrust and allowing and going into and being present with it. And he also has said that there are 3 human rights: the right to be, the right to become, and the right to belong. Which is why I'm studying with him.
Right. Thank you, Lynn. Thank you. Those are things we can take with us. Thank you.
Jel, you unmute.
Yes, thank you. I don't know, your talk this morning brought so many images to my
Good.
mind,
That's
and
just what Theopoetics is supposed to do. Images and
Yes,
more
yes.
images and more conversation.
and I think to sort of bring them all together, I'm struck by the cage we put ourselves in by using words and not feeling hearing the music, because words sort of are limiting. In our men's group at Christ Church, we meet weekly and discuss books, and we got into this. I can't remember what the topic was, but I was drawn to the fact that people were saying different things, but they were meaning this somewhat of the same thing. And what the analogy that came to my mind is growing up in North Dakota, where there's no cloud cover, so to speak, like it is here in Milwaukee, right on the lake, and looking up at the stars and feeling this sense of awe totally capturing me, or listening to Adagio for strings. It totally captures me. It wells up, it speaks to my soul. And trying to explain that to somebody
Right.
is impossible, because everybody looks at words and they hear them slightly differently. And that's why I think it's, when you look at these parables, people were so taken by this person, Jesus, they had to explain it in some way. And if we just take the literal translation, we may be missing the depth and feeling that these people encountered by this person, Jesus. So I think theopoetics is the only way you can read the Bible. You have to put yourself in the place of these people who were so struck by what he said that it was life changing. Like this walking on the water. Look at, we have baptism from an old life into a new life. Moses crossing the Red Sea from slavery to freedom. Joseph was sort of imprisoned by putting in a dry well. Okay, well is water. Wound up in Egypt. He was able to save his family. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, no, I love that image speaks to image speaks to image. And then the image evokes reflection and thought. It's just like rapport. It's like experience gives rise to symbol, gives rise to thought, you know. But the experience is what I think, you know, you were saying, to get back to that. And and I love what you said about feeling, because I think theopoetics too addresses that feeling part of our apprehension. So it's one thing to say, you know, it's going to rain. I can tell that with the, you know, Bob. It's another thing to say, I feel the rain. Soon it's going to, remember that old song, soon it's going to rain, I can feel it. Soon it's going to rain, I can tell. That's very different than somebody saying, you know, well, it's going to rain this afternoon. Okay. And I think what you're speaking to is that other part of, and as Lynn was saying, that more, it appeals to our sensibilities, our senses, our bodiliness. We feel this in our bodies. And that's where we live. But some of us try to live. Okay. But anyway, I love what you're saying. And Jack Caputo himself would say that theopoetics is the only appropriate school for what we're talking about. So, thanks, Joe. Always good to see you.
Thank
Wish
you.
Mark were here to hear you.
It's so interesting hearing Jill say that about, you know, the theopoetics being the only way to read the Bible. It struck me that theologians have no trouble reading other religious traditions, texts, theopoetically. It's just the Bible that they want to read theologically. So,
Well, and your comment then suggests that theopoetics doesn't have as much truth and validity as theology.
exactly,
And that's a category mistake.
exactly.
So again, it's like saying, somebody recently said, it's like our myths are correct and theirs are
Right,
fantasy, or are lies, or are not true, you know.
right.
So again, this is our lack of understanding about the power of language and our need to, our continual conundrum to say the unsaying, to say what can't be said.
Yeah.
But I'm glad we tried.
Yeah,
But beauty, poetry, music, art has been done in that very spirit. Don't know how to say it, but let me try.
right. Sheila Richards.
Good morning.
Hi, Sheila. Good to see you always.
Let's see here. Okay, so I'm still
Are,
good.
you're on. Yep.
It's good. It's good to see you.
Thank
I have a reflection. I'm Sheila Richards, Aberdeen, South Dakota. The second one is the long one, so I'll just, or you know, a minute. At any rate, I was told some time ago that the story about the walking on the water,
Yeah.
Peter says, if that is you, I will come, which indicates some doubt, you know, is that really you? But that word if in that place, I'm no scholar, I'm quoting somebody else, and two other times I believe in the scripture is also interpreted since. Since that's you, I'm coming. So it wasn't doubt, it was faith, and that it is a story of faith. So I just think that's an interesting, I don't, like I say, I'm not a scholar of the language.
I'm not either.
So
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, we
But-
borrow from everybody. Of course we do.
But I like that. Since that's you, I can do this.
That's
The
nice.
other thing is a rather personal reflection. Let's see here. I'll start like this. In 1958, I was a freshman at Northern State Teachers College in Aberdeen, South Dakota. Now, the story I'm going to tell you is the story I told Marcus at Ring Lake Ranch the first year he was there. I was there that first year that he was there. So he and I are visiting, and he told me that he had taught at Brookings, South Dakota, at South Dakota State University. And he's from North Dakota, and I'm from South Dakota, so we're visiting. And so I told him this story. In 1958, I'm a freshman, and that's all I said. I'm a freshman in college. He may have known I was from Aberdeen. And I had a history professor who said, don't go home and tell your parents this, because they tried to do it last year to get rid of me. So don't bother, because this is ultra conservative territory, especially in 1958. History of civilization, Jesus. What if he didn't really rise out of that tomb? What if that didn't happen? And to quote Dr. Tomley, he says, the disciples are sitting around, oh, woe is us, woe is us. Jesus is gone. What are we going to do? And the disciples say, but we have everything he taught us. We have everything he taught us. We can go into the world and spread this good news. And Marcus looked at me and said, Erwin Tomley, Northern State Teachers College. How he knew that, I don't know, but those two men must have met. But that's what I have preached all my life, as gently as possible, that the resurrection may have other ways to look at it. We have what he taught us. Go and spread the good news.
Nice. Beautifully said, Sheila. Thank you. I agree. And I'm very touched to hear a story that you told Marcus many years ago that I have never heard, but that he heard it. So it's this kind of a beautiful moment. It's like, Marcus, now I'm hearing something you heard many years ago.
Yes.
From the person who said it to you.
The very early
Thank you for this
1990s.
moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for this this Kairos moment.
You're welcome.
And for your good word about the nature and character of resurrection.
Mm,
With us now.
yes.
Thanks, Sheila.
You're welcome.
Karen Pidcock.
Good morning.
Morning.
Thanks, Marianne. I'm calling in from southeastern BC, Canada, for your brilliant Lazarus exegesis, which really, really connects with my only issue with the church, and that is the theological binding in our liturgy.
Mhm.
And the Anglican tradition, which is mine and which I have abandoned only in terms of worship for the last 5 years of my 85 years of life, because of its ongoing insistence of expressing in our liturgical language, creeds, doctrine, and dogma, even ritual, which forever me as a 21st century person caused me to abandon worship. I can't anymore say those, put in our mouths. And yet I'll forever remain grateful for the body of Christ I've known in my Anglican tradition's third leg of reason, which shines forth in you, Marianne, and fortunately in many others today who interpret scripture theopoetically. But I don't expect us ever to become a group of people who know what it means to make Eucharist and can gather around any table in any living room and do it without having our noses in books.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just tired of playing with creeds or singing or explaining them. I guess I feel ready to worship, if at all, in a Reformed tradition like the United Church of Canada that doesn't insist on creeds that belong in history books. That's all I need to say.
Wow. Wonderfully said. You should put that in an essay. It's wonderfully said. I appreciate it. And I love what you're saying too. It's like Jesus saying to the community, unbind him. Unbind. Yeah. Thank you, Karen. I don't know that we'll see it in our lifetime either. More of a flourishing. I don't know. But thank you for your deep words. And I love the fact that over your left shoulder is Jesus himself as I see him.
True, that portrait, my husband, who was a priest, and I, in his last sabbatical which ended in the residential library in Northern Wales, we met a man who,
yeah,
yeah,
yes,
exactly.
yeah.
And we met a man there who lived across the water in the Beatles' hometown, and he invited us to his home during a free day, and he had that portrait on his wall, original one, and we bought one of several, and it's so beautiful because it's called "Thou Knowest Me." And it's like Jesus has told, he's a Semitic young man, and he's told a story, and he's just waiting for us to get it.
Interesting. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I love it. Yeah, that I bet he's waiting for us to get it. Yeah. Thanks, Karen, so much. I deeply appreciate your thoughts and reflections.
Thanks. Bruce Robertson. Bruce, do you want to unmute?
Thank you so much. And I'm so grateful for what you guys are doing, Marianne, and the subject for today. Jesus was not a Christian.
That's exactly right. You heard it here, folks.
And today, our problem is the male values of bombs and bullets and control and territory are in charge. The two tragic wars, the two tragic choices for Americans for president. What's going on? You can't get past the New Testament before we read, women are to be silent in meeting. What's going on here?
Wow.
Right at the very beginning of the Christian tradition, there are two traditions, one Pauline and one James. James' people ultimately became the poor ones, and then they disappeared. But interestingly, the research shows that some of their ancestors are the Palestinians. Anyway, my point being, enough of male, so-called male values that are destroying the world, and up with theopoetics, female values. Jesus was a radical who had a following of women during his lifetime that upset a lot of people. They upset that he loved Mary Magdalene so much. And obviously she had a very important role in Jesus' life. And so thank you for your support of bringing forth the heart rather than the head that wants to control and make more territory. God bless you and thank you.
Oh, thank you, Bruce. Thank you. And I love that up with theopoetics. There's a bumper sticker for us. Thank you, Bruce. Thank you.
Yeah.
We're getting close to closing time, and I have, we've got lots of people yet, but we can call on another, but I know that I have a couple things I want to say about our closing music, and Jeff, I want you to have a word too. So let's go another round.
Okay, we'll end here with David, and I'll just invite those of you who still have a hand up, if you want to join us, if you're able to join us for coffee hour, we can continue the conversation.
That would be lovely. Thanks. Thank
Dave,
you. For
want to unmute yourself? You're not unmuted, David. No, we still can't hear you. It should be down in the lower left-hand corner.
Looks like a little microphone.
There
No,
you
I'm
go.
looking at my picture. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Perfect.
It's been about 15 years since I talked with Marcus in person, one-on-one. And he told me a story that time. I don't want to give him credit for it because it might be somebody else's. But I'd be curious,
Good
Mary.
story. Let's give him credit for it.
Well, I just want to ask you, what do you say to people who say that all these stories, the walking on water, the post-resurrection appearances, it's all fiction? The gospel writers in 100 AD missed Jesus and loved him so much they couldn't let him go, and they made up all these stories about Lazarus and etc. And we've bitten into it all the way up to today. But none of them need the kind of interpretation that you've given us because they probably didn't happen. I've used up my time.
Oh. Well, Marcus may have said this to you, but I mean, he quotes Black Elk that says, well, I don't know if the story happened this way or not,
Right.
but I know that the story is true.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that the stories in the gospel, as we talked about earlier, I think they arose from an experience.
Mm-hmm.
And how else can we talk about this? And in terms of, this is an oral culture, images and all of that. So I think that people who are overly concerned with the factuality of these quote unquote stories, they simply don't understand the nature and character of story. And so they miss the mark.
Thank you.
Yeah. So maybe the stories didn't happen quite the way that we read them, but depending upon how we respond to them, we may find that there is some truth in these stories.
Well, if the resurrection didn't actually happen, that destroys much of Christianity.
And then it provokes the question, what do we mean by resurrection?
Well, we can see what the Bible says about it, I guess.
And we can reflect on that. What do we think it means? What does it mean for us? How do we understand it?
Mm-hmm.
And so Theopoetics really is an invitation to taste and see,
Mm-hmm.
and to your ear.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not everybody's ilk, right? Not everybody's going to be interested in that. But there are many people here on Second Saturday. I think that we're here to taste and see and tune our ear.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah. Great. Okay. And our apologies for those who are in the queue, but if you can, I think that we've lost Mary Fuller, but if you can stay, we'll continue this a little bit in coffee time. Our next Second Saturday is going to be May 11th. That's Second Saturday. And I'm going to be out of country, so I'm going to be in a time zone that has nothing to do with this one. And I have asked Jeff if he would take the Second Saturday on May 11th. So Jeff, our beloved companion and colleague in this journey, in this risk and adventure that we're on, will take May 11th. By the way, I almost didn't go on this trip because of you guys here on Second Saturday and because of my dog. but because of Jeff and some good folks who'll be looking after Theo, I'm going to make this trip. So Jeff, do you want to say a little bit about May 11th?
Sure. First of all, the first thing I have to say, which is obvious to everyone, is that I'm not Mary Ann.
I'm so glad. Yeah.
But what
Mary Ann is funny. Just ask my parents. Just ask my brother.
But what I'd like to explore or reflect on with you all is a theme that I'm calling "Don't Let Go of the Thread." And that comes from a poem by the former Oregon Poet Laureate, Bill Stafford. And I want to look at what threads we have noticed and named in our times together in Second Saturday, and how those threads have helped me to hold on to the thread, to my own thread. And so I'm going to invite you all to consider what it is that's brought you to Second Saturday, what's kept you here, and what have you discovered that maybe you'd forgotten. And so I'll be sharing some stories from my own life and working with this poem and perhaps another one and a song, and we'll see where that takes us.
I am sorry to miss it. I will watch it after the fact. So I will look forward to that. I will catch up, but I'll look forward to being part of that. We always post these things on our website. So I will look forward to that. I'm sorry to miss this, Jeff, but I'm so glad that you will be here to help us work with that, with following the thread.
Right.
Right. Thanks.
Yeah.
I want to say a little bit, I know that we're at closing time, but I want to say a little bit about the music that you're going to hear for our closing music. I'm playing 5 minutes of so it'll be 5 minutes until coffee time, but 5 minutes of a 7-minute rendition of this that's on YouTube that's really worth listening to the whole thing. And I chose it today because I think it reflects sort of what we're trying to get at. The song is called Little Blue, and it's by Jacob Collier. Jacob Collier is a remarkable musician. He's 29 years old. He'll be 30 in August. He's been described as demonstrating harmonic expertise, does so with harmonizations and close harmony and complex chord changes and sudden key changes, and he's fascinated with the human voice. Well, that kind of describes what we're dealing with too. Key changes, harmonies, disharmonies, and our own human voice. So the song Little Blue, people have said, what's it about? Little Blue, what's it about? And it's not clear from when you hear it. So what is Little Blue? Well, he says in an interview that Little Blue is actually a creature that his mother made for him when he was a little boy. Okay, so it's a little creature, it's blue, and it has really big, dark eyes. Okay, so Little Blue was this figure in his own life that meant a whole lot to him. And listen to what unfolds with Little Blue, okay? Originally, this little blue creature. Little Blue, be my shelter, be my cradle, be my womb, be my boat, be my river, be the stillness of the moon. If I could, I'd go with you to a place I never knew. In your eyes so dark and open, there's a light that leads back to you. Little Blue, be my anchor, be my light, my compass star, be my darkness, be my danger, be the strings of my guitar. Little Blue, how I love you, something strong and something true. In your arms so dear and gentle, there's a home that leads me back. Jacob Collier says, some of my favorite songs are about many things at once. There is not one way to take these lyrics. For me, he says, that's always something I aspire to as a lyricist. Okay? And I would say that Theopoetics aspires to this multiplicity of meaning. And yet, amidst the multiplicity, it brings us somewhere. And this is the chorus that he actually invites all of us to sing. Don't be afraid of the dark. In your heart, you're going to find a way to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. You're going to find a way home. And he says, there are many ways to get home. Find a way. Find your way. Whatever you need, find it. And the closing chorus has just a little variation to it. Don't be afraid of the dark. In your heart, you're going to find a way to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. You're going to find a way. Don't be afraid of the light. It's all right. You're going to find your way to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. You're going to find your way. home. I hope Second Saturday helps us do just that. See you May 11th. Then we'll be together on June 8th, which will be our final session for this program year. Those who can join us for coffee hour, please do. Thank you so much for being here, and thanks to all of you who shared and contributed so richly to this conversation today on Second Saturday.